Charles from St. Croix. Hello, how are you, dear? Good to see you. And we've got Claudette, who I saw at the beginning. Always wonderful to see you, my friends. Alrighty, team, let's get started. Welcome to everyone who is dialing in this evening for a wonderful conversation. We're going to go to the next slide to give an overview of this evening's agenda. I will say two things. As we get started, just with some sort of housekeeping, our evening's conversations will be recorded. So do please keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that all of the sort of opinions, thoughts, and ideas, suggestions that you might hear this evening are all personally held by the person who is speaking. So they're not a direct sort of representation of the Women's Coalition, which is the host for this evening's conversation. Carolyn, if we could see the agenda on our next slide. And I mentioned to everyone that we do have everyone on mute for this evening. I think we've got 47 folks who are on the call right now. And we may have quite a few others who will be dialing in. So we just want to make sure to eliminate any background noise. Wanted to give a quick hello. And actually, I forgot about the slide before. Hi, guys. I'm Allison. Allison Reeves. I've been working with a number of nonprofit organizations on St. Croix for the past few years around community development, capacity building, and organizational leadership. So the friends that I've mentioned on the call have been very supportive of various projects, various initiatives and events that I've been a part of facilitating or helping to organize. So I'm incredibly proud and privileged to have been a part of these community conversations. I do a lot of work with the St. Croix Foundation for Community Development and also other organizations that are part of that incredible work. I think on my end, I may have lost the PowerPoint. Carolyn, are you having any trouble? Do you need me to show it, or do you want to go ahead and go take us back to it? Thanks so much appreciated. We'll go to the next slide which lists our agenda for the evening. And many thanks to the Women's Coalition that has been working in a very steadfast way on developing a series of conversations. This is the first of 4. And Clemma will go into detail about a certificate that we are glad to offer to all the individuals who are able to complete all 4 dialogues, tonight being the first. And so our agenda, I think if we can go to the next slide, Carolyn. Our agenda, I'll give a quick overview of some of the pieces that will comprise tonight's conversation. I'll also go through some community rules just to kind of keep our conversation aligned. I'll then pivot to Clemma, who will offer an introduction on behalf of Women's Coalition, and she'll give some details about the certificate of completion. We'll then ask our contributing guests to give us an overview of the organizations they represent, and they'll be the ones who offer their own interpretations of various definitions in the realm of anti-racism. We'll then move to a group breakout rooms, and we'll aim to have 5 to 6 individuals in each breakout room. So please be patient as we sort of move in that area of technological greatness. And we hope to have 5 to 6 people in each sort of breakout room so that our conversations, can be very meaningful and that everyone will have a chance to participate. After we have those breakout rooms, that'll be about 30 minutes, and there are specific questions that'll help guide the conversation there. After our breakout rooms, we'll then come back as one group, and we'll ask that each note taker who's in those small breakouts report back to the main group. We'll then have an overview of session number 2 from Lisa Morehead, and she'll probably give us an overview on titles of the next 3 sessions. We'll then hear from Deanna James from the St. Croix Foundation for Community Development. And then I will close this out as promptly as I can at or before 7:30, because I love keeping us on time. So one of the things that I was asked to, with a very sort of humorous tone, is to remind you that I'll also be the timekeeper. I've got, several watches happening right in front of me. So if I ask you to kind of wind up a thought or wrap up a statement, It's really just to honor the time that we have together tonight. So please do receive it in that way. Let's go to the next slide, Carolyn. Well, we'll talk through some community agreements. I'll give you a quick second to read through these, and then I'll highlight a couple that are probably the most important. Okay. So the most important pieces, we know that your time is very precious, and if you need to step away, feel free to. Also, for those who are able to participate by video, please be present as much as you can. All of us are very important in this process, especially when we do the breakout rooms. And so having your participation and the participation of everyone on the call will really help us to have productive conversations. Two other things, we do want to honor the chat box parking lot. I'll often say, let's put that in the parking lot. And that means let's put it on the radar for a future conversation, especially because we do have 3 other sessions that are part of this work. And as we have discussions in our groups, we do want to make sure that we're framing our context and our lived experiences through the lens of the United States Virgin Islands. And so if you are a friend to the VI, but your experiences are not quite related, to the Virgin Islands, we ask you to be a listener, right? Because we want these conversations to be very local and to influence, our local patterns and behaviors. Lastly, I'll ask that you acknowledge the timekeeper. If you see me on the screen sort of pointing to time or acknowledging to wrap up, we just ask that you sort of bring your thoughts to a close. All righty, let's go to the next slide. And glad to turn it over to Clemma, who will talk to us a little bit about her work at the Women's Coalition of St. Croix, and then we'll proceed with our evening. So Clemma, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening and welcome to the Women's Coalition Anti-Racism Forum. The time is now to discuss, digest, and dismantle racism in the United States Virgin Islands. We are so happy to have you all here. The Women's Coalition is a 501c nonprofit organization that was founded in 1981. Our mission is to provide advocacy, programs, and services to end all forms of violence and oppression by promoting equality for all. We offer essential and life-saving services to all crime victims 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year, without regard to race, class, or social standing. And we've been doing this for 39 years. The Women's Coalition has been addressing racism in different formats since the 80s. And here in the Virgin Islands, particularly with the recent climate in the mainland and focusing on what's happening to our community, we felt it was important to bring this conversation back home where it needs to be. So we're giving you a safe space. We're giving you an opportunity to speak. We want you to be open. We want you to listen. We want you to take something away, and we definitely want you to add to the conversation. If you attend all 4 sessions, at the end of the 4 sessions, you will be rewarded with one of our beautiful certificates, and you'll be able to walk away not only with a certificate, but self-fulfillment for doing something for yourself for 4 weeks, for 4 sessions, which I think is critical because it's also enriching your life. I also want to take this opportunity, though, to thank my committee, my sisters. We're all equals. I want to thank, start with Attorney Lisa Morehead, who pushed the envelope and made sure it took place. We were having the conversations like everybody else in little groups, and Lisa said, come on, girls, let's get together and get it moving. Thank you, Lisa, who is a longtime board member who made sure we brought it together. Carolyn Forno, who's out here, the assistant director of the Women's Coalition, always behind the scene, but work her butt off. To my sister and my colleague, Carolyn, my hats off to you. Debbie Benjamin with the big smile, our communication person. None of this would probably take place without Debbie sending you the emails. She's on the phone every minute. She's still trying to get people connected. Debbie is what I call our quiet fire. She's quiet, but she's full of fire. Debbie, My respect and hats off to you. Thank you so much for all the work you've done for the agency. The fourth committee member is myself, Clemma Lewis, the executive director, who've been doing this racism work with the Women's Coalition since the 80s and felt it was important for us to continue. The truth is, we cannot do what we do without this work. I would also like to thank Allison in front of us. Allison is extraordinary. She got the right personality. She's a sweetheart. Carolyn called her. She didn't hesitate to say, yes, I would do it. She kept us focused, on time, and targeted. Trust me, you're going to get through the night organized. You're going to be glad that you got in and got out without any scales. Allison, my love, thank you so much for everything you've done. I couldn't do justice without especially thanking Ernest Gilbert from the VI Consortium. He's another one. Debbie picked up the phone and called him, told him we wanted to air because it's COVID. We couldn't do it public. We had to do it through Zoom. He immediately said, I'll put it on the consortium. I get it on Facebook. The topic is so important to me that he felt that he needed to be a partner. Ernest, VI Consortium, thank you so much for standing up for a cause that's well worth you. And thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you so much from the Women's Coalition.
Incredible. Thank you, Clemma, so much. We're now going to move into, our contributors for the evening. And when we think about, the why, right? The why of this work has never been more relevant, especially when you think about the international and national climate in which racism is finding itself, right? What's important is the where, right? And for those on the call who know me, I'm from Hilton Head, South Carolina, right? An island sort of framework, an island context. But because the folks on Hilton Head were not brave enough, right, to have conversations about racism 30 years ago, they're now in a place where they can't even have conversations about equity because the culture of South Carolina, the culture of the United States has really been overwhelming. And so I think that by having a conversation about anti-racism right now in the US Virgin Islands, there's no better time, there's no better space, there's no better organization to pull this together. We're having these conversations now to protect and preserve the kind of life we want to have for the future. So I'm really, really pleased and grateful that Lisa, Clemma, Mary, Jonathan, and Rashidi are willing to have a conversation with us tonight about their lived experiences and how we define certain terms in the world of anti-racist work, right? And so, one of the things that we want to sort of move away from is, we don't want subject matter experts dipping into academia to tell us about our lives, right? We want people that we know, love, and trust to give us their reflections on the community. And so with that, we'll go in the order: Lisa, Clemma, Mary, Jonathan, Rashidi, who all have sort of their perceptions and their takes, and more importantly, their interpretations of specific definitions. We'll go to the next slide, Carolyn. Important to note, all of these definitions came from the dictionary, right? So if you open it up, this is what we find. We wanted to start from a really objective place and then ask our community friends, leaders, and champions to walk us through how we might think about interpreting these terms. Now, after we go through those conversations, we're then going to go into our breakout rooms and walk through, what resonated the most with us, what surprised us, what challenged us, and what do we embrace the most. So let's go ahead and get started. Lisa, I'm going to kick it on over to you to give us some thoughts, and then we'll move through our list of contributing community members. Lisa, you're on mute. I think she still might be on mute. Let's see. I don't know if there's anything we need to do from our end to help out. Let's see. I think Lisa's moving through that. We'll get some technological support there. There we go.
Hi. Sorry about that, folks. Hi, this is Lisa Morehead with a couple of definitions, and I'm doing racism and institutional systematic racism. You can't have one without the other. That's my take on it initially, but let me read them first. Racism, the systematic institutional structures and practices of society that support the exploitation, mistreatment, and subordination of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Now I'm going to go ahead and read institutional systematic racism one time and juxtapose the two so we know what we're talking about and try to reach a common definition so just we can work with it. The institutional systematic racism, the network of policies and practices that create advantages and benefits for whites and that disadvantage people of color, Indigenous people. So my concern with these definitions is this. The way I view racism is it's historical. The institutional structures that we're talking about begin with our very Constitution. There were always people who wanted to maintain power, gain wealth, and perpetuate that power and retain that power. In order to do that, they had to subjugate someone else. And in the structure of the United States, it was Black people. This happens obviously across the world, but if we're talking about the US Virgin Islands, since we're part of the United States, we have to recognize that we are part of this definition of racism because the same systems and policies that are in place stateside affect us here in everything we do, in our inability to vote for president and our inability to get adequate resources from the federal government, and in our inability to be recognized as full citizens. So if we look at the institutional structures, we'll understand that in order for racism to be accepted, there had to be some formal way of justifying it, of rationalizing it. So to say that Black people were 3/5 of a man in the Constitution meant that we were less than. And those feelings have generated many other definitions, many other isms and schisms, many other of the definitions that you'll hear explained following me, because out of racism comes the idea of white supremacy, out of racism comes the idea of internalized racism. But if we don't change the structures, if we don't change the policies that are the underpinnings and the foundation and buttress and perpetuate this idea of racism, we are not going to change anything. I like to say that the discussion of racism is sort of cyclical. I've been around long enough on this planet to know that this has come around more than one time. I grew up during the civil rights movement. And honestly, there've been some progress, we can't deny that, but clearly we can see from what's been happening nationally, there's still somebody's necks that are being stood on, literally, as well as figuratively. So this is what we want to tackle. We want to tackle in the Virgin Islands, how can we dismantle these ideas, beginning with ourselves, because we also have to understand, and you'll hear that as Clemmer follows me, the idea of internalized racism. We are all part of America, so we all, whether Black or white, have something we can work on. And so again, the goal for this workshop is to understand first, that's why we're dealing with definitions, and go from there to work this system a different way, to change it, to make the change you want to be, starting with ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. That is a word, much appreciated. And so, Indy, I'm going to join Mary in giving a hand clap for sure. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pivot to Clemma. And, you know, for those who are able to sort of take notes, please do take notes, because we're going to have breakout rooms based on the definitions in these conversations that Lisa, Clemma, Jonathan, and others will offer to us. So with that, I'm going to pivot on over to Clemma. Let's see, is Clemma off mute?
No. Okay, now I am. Yeah, I was struggling trying. Okay, you can hear me? Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to discuss racist and internalized racism. I'm going to start with racist, the definition, the belief, the attitudes, and the actions of individuals that support racism. When I think about racist people, I think about some examples of what's taking place here in the Virgin Islands. I think about the example of what happened in Frederickstead a couple of months ago when some young local brothers tried to go to the beach and this white woman came out and said they wasn't going on her property to get to the beach. That's an individual. I think about a mother with three children in her car and driving up the island, taking the kids for a drive, and she pulled in one of the driveways and a man came out and told her to get the hell out of her property and start throwing stones at him. I'm talking about everything that took place here. I'm not talking about what taking place in the mainland, because we like to say there's no racism here and no racist people here, and there are. And then I want to bring that's the racist peeps home, and I'm gonna try to be quick because my internalized is heavier. When I think about racist, and Mary will probably relate to this, I think about tennis and what my son peace with tennis. My son is a young African Caribbean male that was born and raised in St. Croix. And I felt like he was always used as the token because it wasn't many Black kids playing tennis back when my son would play tennis. And I would get calls about, can he come sit for a photo op so he'll be the only Black child in the picture? Or we'll be up at one of the tennis clubs and they would question me and him about what school he go to and who is his coach and stuff like that, that used to anger me because, you know, Black children are not supposed to play tennis or know nothing about tennis. And that's here in the Virgin Islands, that is not in the mainland. So it was a big deal that my little Black child played tennis. I also want to end that racist piece about me going to one of the local stores in town looking for some clothes for my son some years back, and the woman following me around the store. Now, there was other people in the store that wasn't my color, but she stayed on top of me. I turned around and asked her, what's your problem? And I proceeded to get my bag and my money and walk out and never return to that store, and made sure I told everybody I knew on St. Croix, do not go to that store. Internalized racism. Believing negative messages about oneself and others based on racism. And I think all of us as people of color, Black people and indigenous people have internalized the racism, whether we like it or not, whether we want to believe or not, including myself, we have all have internalized it because we can't help it. It comes from the racist system, the structure that has been passed down from one generation to the other. We've internalized all the negative messages, far as I'm concerned, from generation to generation, that has caused trauma for our people, trauma for us, that's caused us pain, shame, hurt, and embarrassment. And what we end up doing with that, we end up hurting our own people. So all that we've internalized, we end up hurting people that look like us. I remember when I moved to St. Croix 40 years ago from Chicago, and you can't get no racist than that, to this beautiful Black place. I thought I had died and went to heaven when I stepped in St. Croix, until people start calling me a Yankee, start talking about my alien husband from St. Kitts. I mean, they wouldn't cut me a break, and I was so disheartened because I was in my 20s. I was so hurt because I couldn't believe people that look like me was treating me like that. So I want to say some things we do, because I want it to be clear, because most people just don't get how deep the internalized piece is. Calling people Yankee, Santos, aliens, Garretts, Down Islanders, lazy Cruisians. I'm sure everybody on this piece have heard them words in St. Croix. We marry people in other races. We Black, we marry white. We try to marry up. We try to marry other people thinking that's going to change who we are. We try to marry lighter, thinking if I marry somebody lighter, my kid's going to look white so they can pass. If that's not hate, self-hatred, and then let's not talk about my work. The domestic violence and the sexual assault in this community is off the chart. Every week we getting 3 or more cases of domestic violence. And guess what? That's happening to our people. There's no white people coming and attacking us. That's Black people attacking the women, the children, the sexism, the racism. And what about our community, folks? Killing, Black on Black crime. We are in so much pain. We're hurting so bad. We have internalized all the racism, negativity, that we feel like there's no hope. We don't believe in ourselves. We can't see ourselves outside of the structure. And I feel like it's just intergenerational pain that we got to look at. So for internalized racism, we have to start here. Everybody that's a person of color, indigenous, okay? People of color, Black, we got to look internally. We got to start looking and pay attention to what we saying to each other and how we treating each other. And most of all, look at ourselves and say, so what's going on in me that I need to work on so I don't have to carry around all this internalized hate for myself and my people. So I'll stop on that note. Thank you. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Clemma. Thank you, Clemma. And if I could add 2 examples of, internalized racism that were the most obvious to me. Like if I was on the Virgin Islands and I was really living there day to day and after those hurricanes, I should have had the best WAPA service ever, right? And the fact that WAPA, that is run by, governed by, employed by, like people who look like us, but it's not the best water and power authority in the world. It might not be self-hate, but it's not self-love, right? And so my sense is that if, for the Virgin Islands to have such a massive company to not provide the bare essentials in the most emergency of times, like that's also an interpretation of internalized racism. The second one, and y'all might chuckle, customer service, right? If I walk into a store or a restaurant or any kind of service, I should be greeted with love, right? But in some aspects, just because of the trauma that Clemma has mentioned that we've gone through, and largely because, that whole collection of experiences as a colony, right, results in some internalized pain, trauma, and racism. And so thank you, Clemma, for helping us understand that through a practical lens. And thank you for helping us to have a common understanding of it. I'm going to turn it over to Mary. Is Mary on the line to walk us through some of our next definitions?
Mary's on the line. Happy to be here. Happy to tell everyone that Clemma's son was better than any other tennis kid out there. We had a lot of great tennis afternoons together. My definitions are white privilege, the unearned and unfair advantage of being white in a racist society, and white supremacy, the belief that white people are a superior race and should dominate society. Now, both of these concepts are alive and well in the Virgin Islands and very difficult for many white people to accept. I want to go a little bit into the history of the coalition because I feel like it speaks to this issue well. The Women's Coalition was founded on the principles of anti-racism and anti-oppression. Before we could start our mission of ending violence against women, we had to address the issue of racism. The coalition stands on the shoulders of incredible women of color, and I feel their names need to be mentioned: Dr. Gloria Joseph, Audre Lorde, Dr. Roberta Knowles, Barbara Carrington, Georgette Norman, and I don't have everybody's name, but the women of color in the room were the ones that insisted that anti-racism be central to our work and not a side issue. Well, you can well imagine the conflict this brought up to the white women in the room. They had a very difficult time accepting the fact that the women of color were hammering at the racism and oppression points. Women of color left out of frustration, believing there was going to be a really big white takeover. The white women left because they came as feminists who wanted to find a solution for some services to rape victims in St. Croix, and they did not come there to talk about race. And after months, and I mean months of conflict, the group finally that remained decided, yes, there's a huge connection between racism and violence against women, which is the extreme form of sexism. If we were to be successful and form a truly multicultural organization, if we were to use our power to mobilize, the racism work was essential. Shout out to Ajua for being there at Jump Street, helping us with our anti-racism work. And shout out to Wallace Williams, if he's here, for opening that library morning, noon, and night for some rather grueling meetings. Out of that, we formed a group called White Women Against Racism, and we met every Saturday morning, white women. Women of color agreed to be our mentors, but we believed that the anti-racism work was the job of white people. We educated ourselves, we argued, we watched videos, we disagreed, we went over definitions. The word power in any definition threw people over the cliff. They couldn't handle that at all. And many women left White Women Against Racism because they couldn't accept the premise of the power involved in racism or the connections between the oppressions. It was a struggle that led to a truly multicultural organization that was then able to begin our advocacy work. It was a journey that has enriched my life beyond words. I feel like in a way I am talking about so many of the negative things, but for those of us who stayed, the enrichment in our lives could not be, I couldn't say enough about that. Racism is a learned behavior that can be unlearned. It is the work of white people. It is not about guilt, but it's about recognizing our privilege and all the benefits that come with our privilege. It's personal, it's painful, it's uncomfortable. It's a daily practice with no graduation date. It is work we must do to move forward, to build relationships, and to become allies. Calling out white people on their racism, which white people are really good on making some of their racism incredibly subtle, so subtle that you're not really sure you heard it, but you think you did. Well, I'd like to say about that we must interrupt white people on their racism. And in the words of John Lewis, I call it good trouble. Not being a racist is not enough. We must do the work of being anti-racist. And I'd just like to close with a quote from our founder, Audre Lorde. Certainly there are real differences between us because of race, age, and sex, but it is not those differences between us that are separating us. It is rather our refusal to recognize those differences and to examine the distortions which result from our misnaming them and their effects upon human behavior and expectation. Thank you.
Mary, thank you. Thank you. And to all of our community friends and neighbors on the call who are white, thank you for your willingness to have brave conversations. Thank you for your willingness to be resilient in dismantling what has been for the past 300, 400 years in the making, right? And as Mary said, we don't just need allies, we need the triple A. Allies first, advocates second, activists third, okay? We wanna move from allyship, right, to advocacy, and then to activism. That's where we need our brave white brothers and sisters to step into the fold. So thank you so much for your willingness to have conversations about being on that glide path. I'm going to now turn to my friend, Jonathan Williams. Where are you, Jonathan?
I am right here.
Hello, hello. If you could just give us sort of some background, your organization. I'm sorry, Mary, I didn't have the chance to ask you to name your organization, but actually let me do that right now because I really want to give that space. So Mary, I'm sorry please forgive me. If you could just offer your organization that you're representing. I think you're on mute.
I'm thrilled to report that I am not representing an organization. I am a retired from the Women's Coalition and working 2 days a week with 1- and 2-year-olds and being retired and loving St. Croix. But my grounding is in St. Croix Women's Coalition, but I can't really say that that's my affiliation at this point, even though it's in my heart forever.
Yes, well, you are a community leader and champion. And so Mary, thank you. Jonathan, if you could start by giving us your name and organization that you represent, and then go right into your definitions.
Sure. My name is Jonathan Williams, and I'm the development coordinator at the St. Croix Foundation. However, I just want to be clear that my words, my thoughts this evening are very much personal and my own. So this evening, the words that I'm going to be speaking on are stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination. And so stereotype is a widely held opinion that may or may not be based on fact or experience about an individual or a group of people. Prejudice is then myth, missing information, misinformation, lies, and or stereotypes of a particular cultural or social group, including beliefs and attitudes that are not necessarily acted upon or expressed. And then discrimination is the acting out of that prejudice. So in thinking about these words, contemplating them and my experience with them, and I'm a native son of St. Croix. My family's originally from Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, but I was born and raised here. What struck me immediately is how each fed into the following. Stereotypes are largely the base for informing prejudice and discrimination. As I mentioned, is just the physical and discrimination, as I mentioned, is just the physical manifestation of prejudice. In my experience locally in my home, these words largely come into play when speaking or thinking about relationships between socioeconomic classes. But then when we consider who largely occupies what classes, one can easily see how race then becomes of pivotal and then primary importance to the discussion. One thing I think is important to outline here in this discussion is that the dismantling of systems that perpetuate stereotypes, which lead to prejudice and then inform discrimination, is that we must be intersectional. What I've experienced in the Virgin Islands is that racism often exists beneath the surface. It's those subtle microaggressions, it's those things that you think you heard, but maybe you're not sure that you actually did. It's the way that you're treated when you walk into certain stores, when you frequent certain businesses, when you move into certain neighborhoods. It's never quite outwardly said, but it's a feeling that you have and that as a person of color, you know and you hold true. And so, whereas I've found that sexism, ableism, homophobia, and transphobia are much more at the forefront. In seeking to dismantle systems of oppression, we have to have a dialogue that is holistic. We can't simply work on one thing without considering all of the other forms of discrimination that exist. It's like the conversation of who you center on when you have a discussion of racism. It's often held that Black women are the most disadvantaged and disrespected women in the United States of America, and thus the US Virgin Islands, despite us having a matriarchal society. But I think that of even more importance, I think what we should center is the trans Black woman who is every day murdered, disrespected, and disregarded. And I think a lot of times we don't even have the appropriate vocabulary to be able to have these discussions. So I really encourage us all to have a wide lens as we consider all of the different forms of discrimination that really start with racism. So thank you, that's all I have to say tonight.
Jonathan, I'm so glad to call you my friend. Thank you, much appreciated. I'm now going to move over to, I believe, Rashidi, who will wrap us up with the definitions. And then right afterwards, we're going to organize ourselves into breakout rooms. So Rashidi? And if you wouldn't mind, Rashidi, giving us an idea of the organization that you work with or represent. Is Rashidi able to hear us?
All right, here we go.
There we go.
You can hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
My name is Rashidi Klassen, the Vice President of the Tim Duncan Foundation. I own Vivid Streaming, online radio station in the Virgin Islands. I own a sports bar / Virgin Islands Sports Museum called Windmill 2.0. I'm a promoter, general youth advocate, and proud Virgin Islander. I happen to be thrilled to see Miss Mary Mingus. I haven't seen her in a very long time. And I just feel like the Women's Coalition is a room full of real people. And I'm honored to be affiliated with tonight's project. My definitions are oppression, which is prejudice plus power equals oppression, unjust or cruel exercise of authority or power. Bigotry, unreasonable, usually obsessive and or obstinate attachment to a baseless belief. And bias, prejudice in favor or against one thing, person, or group. Bias denotes an attitude that is implicitly unfair. I had a basketball scholarship in Indiana, so I feel like a lot of the things that still happening, I was surprised to have met for the first time coming from the Virgin Islands. Being a predominantly Black community, I didn't have the expectations of racism. I remember when I first got on campus, I saw the Confederate flag everywhere. And one evening, we had a player from North Carolina who was outside of the dorm just losing his mind because of the Confederate flags all over the campus. So I, ignorant me, didn't know any better. I asked, what's the problem? And he's like, stating the obvious. Don't you see all these Confederate flags here? And I'm like, yeah. And, you know, growing up, I saw the Dukes of Hazzard and I loved it. Like that was my show. So I didn't know what the Confederate flag meant. But to hold on to these things and these symbols for all these years speaks to the lack of care and concern for so many for the feelings and emotions of others. And to see that in 2020, we still live in all of these realities, and you have individuals who would say they're not racist, not realizing implicitly they are, because if you are willing to accept what the Confederate flag stands for, then clearly there's something wrong with, if not outright racism, there's definitely something wrong with your moral compass, I believe. So one day my coach sat me down and I actually got in trouble because I was part of a protest over a Black Santa Claus, believe it or not. So we had a dorm director who was Black, affirmative action in play, and his job was threatened because of placement of this Black Santa Claus. So our position was, well, you know, Santa Claus is a fictitious character, but these Confederate flags everywhere are real. So we had a protest and the coach called me into his office and asked me, do I pay to go to school? No. Do you pay for your books? No. Do you pay for your room? No. I was like, okay, I don't like the way this thread of questions is going. And then finally he said, well, then you don't have the right to complain about things around here. And I was like, what you talking about? He's like, well, I heard you went to the dean's office with them people. I was like, who's them people, coach? No, I heard you went over there with the Black students to complain. So at this time, I still think I'm speaking to a reasonable person, my coach. And I'm like, well, you know, coach, we find the Confederate flags hanging everywhere to be offensive as well. And the coach said to me, well, let me tell you about when I went to school. I hung the Nazi flag on my door, and it wasn't because I didn't like Jews. I just liked the way the flag looked. And at that point, I just knew my basketball career there was over. But in that moment, we went to places in that town. We went one day to find out if the White Kitchen, the name of the restaurant, actually had that meaning. And it wasn't about the paint on the walls. And the White Kitchen was the White Kitchen. It was everything that we thought someplace in Indiana called the White Kitchen would be. And, you know, I heard Clemma talk about internalizing, and I've been called nigger and bitch by white people. And as I see the things that evolved with George Floyd and all of that, I thought about, it was an emotional time for me because I thought about how I was able to escape Indiana unscathed. You know, so suppose the police did show up at the White Kitchen, you know, as the waitress had warned us. Suppose I did go with my teammate whose name was Tyrone Outlaw and beat up the dude that called me nigger. Like, what would have happened to me? What could have been my path? But because I was the one in the White Kitchen who was like, listen, dudes, we found out what this place is all about, and I plan to leave before anybody else gets here. So let's go. So we left, and I lived to fight another day. But I think because things like that are so egregious and so obvious, I feel like sometimes people who don't align with those things that are grossly and obviously racist, they automatically assume that I am not racist because, you know, I mean, I don't go to that extreme. You know, I mean, I would, as a white person, never patronize a business called the White Kitchen. So you kind of put it in the back of your mind that you're not that. But even
and Rashidi, I'm sorry, I just need to pop in. We're just going to keep an eye on time. I could listen, tell stories all night, but we do have an agenda we want to honor. So if I could ask that you just wrap up with a few more thoughts, and then we're going to move into our breakout rooms, if that's okay.
Yeah, all right. So I feel like locally, the way we cover the news here, because the police department is predominantly Black, we don't give them the credit they deserve. I saw a story on page 2 about the consent decree and our police department not being able to fulfill those obligations. But in the same paper on page 5, I saw a murder arrest. And I feel like the way we cover those things, I heard people mention WAPA earlier, you know, we'll post the picture and the address of a Black person who committed a crime in our community. But in the case of the WAPA attorney, we spared us his address and his picture because we were concerned about his safety. And I feel like the same safety we are concerned about our local people. So that's it.
Excellent, Rashidi, thank you. And thank you for your leadership in so many ways. And the thing that really sort of resonated with me, and I don't know if it's for others on the call, that Confederate flag means so many things to so many people. But what really concerns me, y'all, is when that Confederate flag starts showing up in St. Croix. Pickup trucks to all the newcomers who find themselves at Lime Tree Bay. That's a situation, right? And I really hope we can harness tonight's conversation so that we're able to offer, you know, a united front around what that Confederate flag means to so many and how it's hurt people for so long. From now, I know Carolyn is working on the back end to help move us into some breakout rooms. We're going to aim to have all of our breakout rooms consist of about 7 people. We want to keep these conversations intimate and candid. Maybe 2 things to keep in mind. Number 1, please appoint a note taker, because what we're going to do is when we come back to our full group, we're going to ask our note takers to give us a summary of one of the answers to these questions. And you'll look on your left-hand side. And if there could be a note taker who also keeps an eye on time, we've sort of allotted 30 minutes for each of these questions to be answered. So the first 5 minutes, would love for you to talk about which word and or definition resonated the most with your group. So take 5 minutes to kind of build some consensus around that. The next 5 minutes, based on your local experience, how is this conversation about anti-racism being shaped on St. Croix, St. Thomas, and St. John? About 5-minute conversation on that. A 10-minute conversation on how your experience tonight can translate into an actionable item. And then the last question, what are the action items that individuals in your group are willing to take based on what we've talked through tonight? So the action item that you're willing to take, all of our note takers, that's what we want you to report on when we come back as a group. So you'll see that all of these questions kind of lead into the next one, but that last question is the most important, action items that we're willing to take. Carolyn, will this slide be available for viewing when people go into their breakout rooms?
I don't know that the slide will be available, but maybe we can put it in the chat.
Okay,
And
perfect.
that way they will have access to it in the chat.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. So I can do that. If you want to go ahead and start putting people in their breakout rooms.
I have it all ready to go. I just got to open the rooms.
Super, let's do it.
Ready?
Ready.
All right.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. I see we have